and welcome to RadioTimes.com's deep dive into Netflix's You. I'm Abby, drama editor here at RadioTimes.com.
And I'm Morgan, drama writer here at RadioTimes.com. As well as kicking off in a brand new location here in London, You Season 4 also welcomes a cast of new characters and sees Joe Goldberg adopting a new alias and also investigating a murder mystery of his own.
Police are continuing to investigate a second murder among the elite.
They're calling him the Eat the Rich Killer.
So, Abby, what do you think of You Season 4 Part 1 so far?
Well, I have to be honest with you, Morgan. I'm not the world's biggest You fan. I've watched it through gritted teeth, largely for work purposes, and I have to say it was largely the same with the first part of Season 4. That obviously could all change in the second part, but that's how I'm currently feeling. My biggest issue with this show is Joe, which is a problem because he is the face of the show, he's the protagonist, but not for the reasons you might expect. Obviously, being a serial killer and a stalker, all very, very bad. We do not champion that at all. But he's just so sneery and self-important, and he has this superiority complex because he reads a lot of books, ergo he thinks that makes him better than everybody else. And because we get so much internal monologue, again, there's more of that in this season, it's just like a bullet train hitting you at all times. You can't really get away from it. His voice is the dominant factor, and because of that, I just find it so deeply unenjoyable. Obviously, we do have this new format with the murder mystery, the whodunit. Joe is being hunted rather than the hunter, which is interesting, and that does change things up a bit and give it a new lease of life, which was vital. I think we were saying before, it couldn't have just done the same thing again. But yeah, at this stage, not hugely excited for part 2, but that's just me. Morgan, what are your thoughts?
I thought that Part 1 kicked off in a really clever manner of kind of slowly telling you the story of how Joe follows on from Season 3, kind of our questions about Marianne are somewhat answered. And also we're introduced to this brand new group of friends. Also seeing how Joe is being introduced to the English elite, kind of this Sendry House members club, the riches, the wealth of English society, is also quite a clever way of interweaving conversations about politics, wealth, and social mobility here in England. I think also the format of the series, like you said, Abby, being a murder mystery, is a classic format. It's one that he interrogates as a professor through literature in this part of the season, but also is a format in this series that I think revitalizes this new season. I think following on from Season 3, if we continued in the same vein of Joe being just obsessed by one singular woman and kind of being this very problematic, stalkerish, obsessive character, it was always going to get a bit tired and weary. But this time round, we're seeing Joe being chased by the Eat the Rich Killer, who in itself brings up questions about morality and whether the people that the person is killing kind of deserve to be questioned by wider society as well.
Exactly. We were saying off camera before the fact that we're rooting for the Red. Is that too strong? But we are somewhat rooting for him. Yeah. You know, that calls into question our morality as well. Are we supposed to enjoy this? However abhorrent they are at times, and they are abhorrent, we will get onto them later. What does that say about us, the audience?
I think it's something that You manages to do seamlessly throughout all its previous seasons as well, within Joe as well. I think no matter how you start the series, you're always somewhat rooting for Joe Goldberg as a character, no matter how problematic that is, really. You're always hoping that he comes back and strives to do better and maybe has a new identity and does do better. And in that's kind of replicated this time around with the Eat the Rich Killer. You are kind of placed as a viewer in this question of morality, of whether you should kind of agree with the wider message that the killer's trying to spread in also killing these specific individuals.
And also he doesn't kill Marianne.
No.
Which he could have done.
That was a very big surprise. Yeah. And all of our questions about Marianne kind of got summarised and pieced together in that first episode. We saw how he came and confronted Marianne, but also in a massive turn of events, he let her go.
Exactly. That was a huge personal development for Joe. We've seen him time and time again. If he ever feels like he's been backed into a corner, if he's at risk, then he takes the necessary steps to silence them. But he didn't do that this time. So we could say he's a changed man. It doesn't wipe the slate clean.
We could say that. But then again, in the first episode, we do bear witness to probably one of the most gruesome body disposal scenes I've ever seen on TV.
How do you feel about the show handles those aspects? Do you think because it is largely tongue-in-cheek, it can get away with it in the way that other shows can't? Or do you think there are times when even You takes it too far? Because that has been my problem with the show in relation to female violence in the past. My stomach has been turned by that.
I think this time round it's following on from the revelation about Marianne, seeing Jo adopting this new persona as Professor Jonathan Moore. Then all of a sudden you're hit with this gruesome body disposal scene that's paired together with a small football match in the background, Cardi B playing in the background, and also bearing witness to just truly gruesome scenes. So realistically, it is a thing of the series does take it too far, but also it does manage to interweave it with some more comedic moments that just really do underline how ridiculous Jo is as a character.
Yes, the entire show is ridiculous, and some people love that and they lean into it. If that's not your bag, you're going to hate it. And maybe that's where I fall down. Let's talk about the new cast, the new characters, a whole new bunch to feast on. Who caught your eye? Who did you find interesting? Who did you think really added something to this story?
I think that one of the main cast members carrying this entire season is Charlotte Ritchie's character of Kate. We're introduced to her as the girlfriend of Malcolm, a fellow professor at Jo's university, who was killed in the first episode and kind of kickstarts this whole rat race of the Eat the Rich killer versus Jo. And Kate is very no-nonsense. She's quite cold. She does not buy what Jo is selling in terms of his charm and his intellect. She's very quick to knock him down a peg or two. And in the same way, I also really like Amy-Leigh Hickman's character of Nadia, who is also a student of Jo's at the university. These are two very strong-minded women who are intelligent in their own ways and who don't necessarily succumb to Jo's charm straight away. They do interrogate his motivations for coming to London. They don't really buy what he's saying when they're first introduced to him. And I do think that these two women are women to most certainly look out for in part 2.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you were saying there about succumbing to Jo's charm, obviously you want characters, female characters in particular, to steer clear of that, but also he is charming and he's got this wide-eyed, help me, save me look almost on his face. He is like a damsel in distress character at times, almost. And I think he does draw you in. And I think that's a really interesting aspect of the show, the fact that his charms are hard to resist, but not for the ways you might expect. He has this vulnerability about him. And I think you're totally right about Charlotte Ritchie's character. Kate, obviously people will know her from Feel Good and Ghost. She's just immensely, even in this role, she's very, very standoffish, cold, aloof. She has this quality to her that just draws you in. And I think, you want to know more about her. I'm very suspicious of her still, even though she's aligned herself with Jo, and by the end they're very much on the same page, rooting for one another. But I'm suspicious about her and what's going to be revealed in season 2. Do you have your reservations about her character?
I feel like, because she always seems to be at least 2 steps ahead of Jo. And I think when we're all watching along and we're trying to figure out who the Eat the Rich killer is, as well as Jo himself, we can't help but put her in the line of suspicion. She always seems to be around. She has her motives and motivations. She doesn't really seem to like a lot of the people that she's surrounded herself by. And she is on par with the same intelligence level as Jo.
Yeah.
What about other characters, Abby? Is there anyone else that's caught your eye?
I think quite a few of the characters within that friendship group, Gemma and Blessing, spring to mind. Their character development is so limited that we don't really know anything about them apart from surface level identifiers, indicators, and for that reason, I forgot about them very quickly. Gemma, as we know, is brutally murdered. The body count just keeps rising in this show. Blessing still going at the end of part 1, but I wouldn't be surprised if we lose her in season 2. I wouldn't be surprised if we lose all of them by the end of this show. So I think there's some underdeveloped characters within that group as well, and possibly that's why I find it hard to get on board with the show, because characters do feel so disposable and flimsy. Rhys Montrose, we're going to get on to him in a little bit more detail. But what do we think of him? Because he aligns himself with Jo. They both have troubled backstories. They've seen trauma. He obviously comes from a working class background, as Jo does. They very much feel like brothers in arms, and he's one of the only people that Jo likes. I think he's the only person that Jo likes initially. What do we think about him and what he brings to this?
I think Reese brings us a really interesting dynamic in this friendship group. He, like Joe, almost feels somewhat removed from the friendship group. He is kind of looking in on the friendship group when Joe first meets him at Sendry House, and they're kind of sitting in those 2 armchairs, looking at the wealth on display in that room and looking how everyone's kind of just taking shots and joking about homelessness and joking about cancel culture. He seems very much like he's got his head screwed on in a similar way to Joe, but there's also a hint of suspicion in that, and of course we do find out that he is the rich killer at the end. But I feel like it was also kind of hiding in plain sight. I don't know what you thought about that twist.
That was not a rug pull. I mean, he wasn't there for the entire period when they went to that country house, the country manor, and I was thinking, well, he's not here. Where is he? They're setting him up for a grand entrance, and lo and behold, they did. He is the serial killer. I just think the fact that he was the only character that Joe really warmed to, it was there right from the start. That wasn't a surprise, which makes me think that perhaps something bigger is coming in season 2 to eclipse that, because it wasn't an especially fascinating twist. Did you feel the same?
Yeah, I do feel like it was kind of written in the stars from the first episode, wasn't it? When Reese kind of pulls out of the party and says, oh, I've got to go and catch a flight to Berlin. And then all of a sudden we see Malcolm winding up dead on Joe's dining table. So I do feel like it was always there. Reese was always in the line of suspicion. But then seeing him, how he kind of revealed himself to Joe at the end, was quite interesting. I felt like it was almost like he was embodying a different kind of character altogether. He suddenly became more cocky and confident than ever. And it is kind of similar to what we see in Joe and what we have seen with Joe in previous seasons. Joe does display this kind of multi-layered personality, and one minute he's lovable and book smart, and the next minute he's an obsessed stalker who is also a serial killer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also what I thought was really interesting about Reese was the fact, and I think this is so applicable to modern day politics. Obviously, he's running for mayor. He announces his candidacy, his official candidacy at the very end. But, you know, it's what we see with modern day politicians who are, you know, born and raised in working class environments, and they go on to become a member of the elite, the people calling the shots, making the decisions, who have wealth. And, you know, I feel like you can begin in one place in your life, and those people very much still hold on to their roots, but it doesn't mean you can't be subsumed by the upper echelons and become part of the problem, which I thought was really interesting. And I think, you know, we see that with Reese. You know, he's an outsider. He's also part of the group. He's very much rooted within that world. And I think we see that a lot today within modern politics as well, which I thought was interesting. So obviously, big twist at the end. What do we think about part 2? Where is it going to go?
I think part 2, we've got a lot of questions going into part 2, but also reservations. I think the way that part 1's been set up, it very much seems like a murder mystery, just your basic murder mystery. And now we know who the person is to blame. So going into part 2, is it going to continue with Reese picking off the friendship group one by one? Or is it really going to see Joe and Reese coming to a head? I feel like in that final scene of the final episode of part 1, we see Joe kind of pushing Kate away from him, and also seeing Reese announce his official run for mayoral candidacy here in London. And I feel like in that Joe, like the cogs are turning in Joe's head. Joe is now thinking of a plan to take him down, and I feel like that's really where we're going to see part 2 heading.
Yeah, and that's back to the Joe of old, right? You know, manipulating, being deceitful, lurking about in the shadows, and that is the Joe of old. But as you said there, the fact that he's pushing Kate away again. Personal development, the bar is so low for Joe, like it's incredibly low. But you know, that is development, you know, in terms of his character. He previously would have been all in on someone like Kate and then brutally murdered her. But at this moment in time, she's still alive. She saved him at the end, which was also a bit of a role reversal there. The show is doing some things differently.
It is, and I feel like the fact that they are now kind of trauma bonded in a sense may also actually have big consequences in part 2, because Kate now knows what Joe is kind of capable of. I mean, when they were disposing of Gemma's body together, it all seemed far too easy for Joe. So I think Kate is a very intelligent character, and I feel going into part 2, she may actually sit down and start to wonder, is Joe, or Jonathan, as they know him as, is Jonathan who he actually seems to be.
Exactly. But I think the biggest question hanging over you is when they do decide to wrap this up, we don't know if there's going to be a fifth season. I would assume so. It's always in the, the Netflix top 10 ranking whenever it's on. But are they going to give Joe a happy ending? Show that people, whatever they've done, however appalling they've been, people can change and better themselves and they should be rewarded for change? Or are they going to, kill him off? Are they going to deliver some more trauma? How are they going to handle Joe at the end of it all? And I think that will say a lot about the show, what it wants to say about redemption,
about
and morality, about justice as well. So plenty more to come from this series. Of course, a second part of season 4, and then potentially another season, 2 more seasons, who knows? Beyond that, we will find out. Thanks for watching this video on Netflix's You. We hope you enjoyed it. We did too. Don't forget to like and subscribe and leave your comments below as well. We'd love to know what you think of the series. And don't forget to head over to radiotimes.com for all of your latest TV and movie news. Until next time.